morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us. Thank you for joining us in this opening session to the WorldFAIR webinar series. This session today will talk about the project and its placement within the European and international landscape. As I mentioned, this webinar is now being recorded and the recording will be uploaded on our YouTube channel and the WorldFAIR website. We will start with a series of presentations from our speakers, and towards the end of the webinar, we will have around 20 minutes for your questions and for a discussion between our speakers. So during the presentations, please feel free to post your questions in the chat and we will address them towards the end. So who do we have with us today? First, we have Simon Hudson, the Executive Director of CodeData and the WorldFAIR Project Coordinator, who will talk to us about the WorldFAIR conception and vision. Next up, we have Hilary Hanaho, Secretary General of the Research Data Alliance, who will speak to us about the RDA and the WorldFAIR project. Next up, Javier Lopez from the European Commission, who will talk to us about the EOSC and the project in an international context. Ari Azmi, our RDA Europe Director, will speak about the WorldFAIR and RDA Europe. Towards the end of the webinar, you will hear from myself again, and I will talk to you about our published project deliverables, upcoming deliverables, and I will also present to you our webinar series schedule. And as I mentioned, we will finish with a Q&A. So I will now give the floor to Simon, our first speaker. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thanks very much, Alex. Just let me manage my real estate on the screen. Hopefully everyone can see my presentation there. So yes, I want to introduce the WorldFAIR project. I'm really going to focus on what is it, how did it come about, what's our vision for the project. Full project title, Global Cooperation on Fair Data Policy and Practice. It's about implementing FAIR. We're focusing above all on interoperability and reusability. There's a lot of work going on around the F and the A, but we're really trying to push beyond the low-hanging fruit to the more challenging areas of interoperability and reusability. And it's global. 2-year project funded by the European Commission. And something that is particularly notable about WorldFAIR is that we were allowed to have as partners and as beneficiaries institutions in countries outside the European Union and without agreements with the Horizon Europe program. And I think that particular rule for this project was very far-sighted, and it helps us fulfill that mission of being open to the world of establishing global links. And in the world of data, that's particularly important, because research is international. The development of data standards, metadata standards in particular, is international and depends upon those global communities. So we have institutions in many countries around the world, and those countries are listed there. A total of 19 partners. We started on the 1st of June, so nearly exactly a year ago. In particular, to address this challenge of how we implement FAIR in a range of research areas, the partners include a number of authoritative entities and often international in character. So including IUPAC, the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, the One Geochemistry Consortium, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, the Ocean Data Information Service. Now, so Ocean Data and Information Service. Now, this is really important because decisions about standards and about interoperability for research areas are more likely to be long-standing. They're more likely to be taken up if they have that backing of authoritative international entities. And I think that's really important. And reinforcing that, there's an important partnership in WorldFAIR between CodeData and the Research Data Alliance. A little bit later in this presentation, I'll say a little bit about the CodeData perspective on that in the relation to our work for ISC. So here's the logos of all our partners. spread around the world from New Zealand to the east coast of the US. You can imagine how difficult some of our meetings are in terms of time zones. We see very much, this is the conception and vision part of the presentation, we see WorldFAIR very much as responding to this recommendation in the Turning Fair into Reality report. And I'll stress this a little bit. I always saw this recommendation as the keystone recommendation in that report, and it strikes at something that I think is really essential if we are to make progress with FAIR and with the greater utility and greater use of data for research and ultimately the benefits of that research. We need to empower research communities internationally to develop interoperability frameworks and to enable them to make the decisions around their practices for data sharing, data format, metadata standards, etc., etc. That really has to come from those communities, and those communities are international and global. But also to address global challenges, which are in their very nature interdisciplinary. We need to express those interoperability frameworks in common ways and to adopt global standards where relevant. And that's really central to the philosophy of the WorldFAIR Project. So very quickly about how we came into this project from the co-data perspective. The call for proposals mentioned explicitly the Turning Fair into Reality report, that recommendation, the need to implement FAIR, and also mentioned explicitly outputs and outcomes from the work of the Research Data Alliance and from co-data. So immediately to design the project, co-data and RDA collaborated on that. From our perspective, this spoke to some work that we had been doing for a number of years already. You'll hear later about RDA, which is a global community. Co-data has a similar and complementary area of action. Co-data is the Committee on Data of the International Science Council. That entity, our parent body, has in one form or another existed since 1919 and acts as a representative body for science and scientists globally. It represents research academies, science academies, international scientific unions, and can genuinely claim to be the international voice of science outside but related to the UN system. And so therefore co-data has a strong link to international scientific unions, those representative organizations, and strong links to the UN system as well. ISC asked us a few years ago to start developing a program of work called Making Data Work for Cross-Domain Grand Challenges. Now, the reason for this is the International Science Council sponsors a number of global coordinating activities. Programs like Future Earth on climate change and climate change adaptation, like integrated research on disaster risk reduction, like the program on urban health and well-being. Now, all these research areas closely connected to the Sustainable Development Goals are in their nature interdisciplinary. And so they need an interdisciplinary approach. They need the collaboration of researchers from many domains, and they need to be able to mobilize data from different sources. And that presents a very significant technical and social challenge of how we combine data from different disciplines. It's hard enough to combining data from a given discipline, let alone across disciplinary boundaries. So we were tasked with that from 2017, and we'd even done some work before then. We ran a series of workshops, etc., and started thinking about how we would go about this. And really some of that thinking has led directly into the WorldFAIR Project. I've got two slides here, which I'm going to skip over very, very quickly because we don't have time to go into the detail. We ran a series of workshops in Paris at the Royal Society, then at the Dagstuhl facility. We developed a really important collaboration with the Data Documentation Initiative and a considerable interest in their new standard DDI, CDI cross-domain integration. We've done work on FAIR vocabularies and our activity on digital representation of units of measurement. All these things relate to that activity about how we combine data from many different sources. The work on FAIR vocabularies, I'll just flag, there's an upcoming webinar and report on FAIR vocabularies for demography. And this is some information about the collaboration with DDI on DDI, CDI. Those will be available later. So all that thinking fed into the design and the approach that we're taking with the WorldFAIR project. So when we put the project together, Hilary and I wrote to a number of our contacts in the co-data and the RDA communities, and we put together a set of case studies. And I should have mentioned that the work that we've been doing since 2017 really emphasized a case study approach. We need to engage with the practice in particular research areas and then try and extrapolate from that and understand how data works in particular domains and across domains. So there's the list of the case studies in the WorldFAIR project, and ranges from chemistry through nanomaterials, through geochemistry, 3 social science case studies in social surveys, in population health and urban health, which is continuing an important area of focus, 2 relating to biodiversity, one led by GBIF, another looking at pollinator data, ocean sciences, disaster risk reduction, cultural heritage. There's a lot of information on the website, on that slide, about those case studies. We don't have time to go into that, but it's really fascinating. And we're trying to get to grips in a detailed way with how the data works for each of these domains. In the webinar series, which Alex will give further information about later, you'll have an opportunity to understand a lot more, to hear from these case studies and to understand their work. In the WorldFAIR project, each of these case studies, each of these work packages is producing a set of recommendations, some practice, sometimes some training materials about the interoperability and FAIR challenges in their domain. And so there'll be a lot of outputs from that. There'll be a raft of outputs at the end of this month. Some of them are already being produced, but as we're reaching the 12-month part, the 12-month post in WorldFAIR, no fewer than 7 of these case studies will be presenting their first deliverables and their reports and early recommendations. To close, you saw at the center of this petal diagram and synthesis activity, which is led by WorldFAIR, which is led by CoData. With each of the case studies, we have undertaken FAIR implementation profiles, which is a form of questionnaire to understand how the data works in each of those domains and how they respond to the FAIR principles. There's a report on that which was produced in November last year. Then we're taking that information and trying to input that into and combine that with our existing work about a cross-domain interoperability framework, which is a set of recommendations relating to a series of functional requirements about how we can respond to those needs of interoperability and various other of the FAIR principles. In particular, we're looking at things like provenance and processing information, about data structure, about how we articulate the relationship between concepts and measurements in data, and how what the good practices are for communicating the semantics around the data. There's some initial working documents and the outcomes of a workshop that we held outside the RDA plenary in March. And please have a look at that for further information. And that's really what I wanted to say about the approach that we're taking in WorldFAIR. I hope that gave you some insight into our approach, and I'll be very happy to answer any further questions. But over to the next speaker.
I believe the next speaker is me, so I will just take on. But so let me share my screen. So as Simon has given an excellent overview of the project WorldFAIR, I wanted to just put it into context as to why is RDA involved, and why what is the mutual benefit, if you like, for RDA to follow or to invest in a project like this, and also for the as an organization, but also for the community that we serve. So first of all, we like to think of RDA as a global greenhouse, and Simon explained quite well, about the co-data and how we are quite synergistic and complementary and collaborative. And this was also the first, we've worked together since RDA's inception 10 years ago, hence the balloons. But it's also true that we had never worked together, I think, if I'm not wrong, Simon, on a project where we also brought in other partners. And it was a wonderful opportunity to do that together for the benefit of our communities, because we do have very many complementary areas of activity. So we like to think of RDA as a global greenhouse. It was set up 10 years ago as a community-driven, so a bottom-up organization, where we see it's the community that defines, if you like, the areas of work in which they invest their volunteer time. And obviously with the intention that this vision is achieved, where the researchers and innovators can openly share and reuse data across technologies, disciplines, and countries. And I'll go back many times in this short presentation about the technologies, the disciplines, and the countries aspect, because that's very much where the WorldFAIR, we see the WorldFAIR connection happening. And we do that through building social and technical bridges. It's important as well that everyone understands that RDA has these very fundamental guiding principles of openness, consensus, inclusivity, that it is community driven, that there's harmonization, and that it's not for profit and technology neutral. And and why are they important? Because the concept behind the foundation of RDA was to ensure that activities that were performed or done under the framework of RDA can actually be shared and reused and taken up and accessed by all. So to avoid, and also to avoid the duplication of efforts. We do this, the work is done by this global community volunteer community through these three mechanisms: working groups, interest groups, and communities of practice. Yeah. And we have different ways in which we engage with the community, with individuals who, of course, are the heart. They're the people who do the work. They're the ones who get involved in these different groups, different mechanisms, and share their knowledge, share their insights, work together and collaborate with peers, and also many different other stakeholders across different communities, expertise, and things to come up with outputs. But of course, it is the organizations that ultimately will implement the outputs from RDA and from other areas. So we have an organizational group as well. And then we have a regional aspect. And this is where I will move on then to bring it closer to the WorldFAIR activity. But the regional aspect is really important as well for there to be the linguistic, for there to be the cultural, for there to be the connections on the ground with what are the priorities in terms of research data management, open science, funding programs, et cetera, from a regional perspective. And that is what makes RDA special, if you like, the global aspect. The fact that it is international, because as Simon said, it's a wonderful thing that the WorldFAIR Project as well had these special, if you like, conditions, because science is global, the collaboration is global. And so ensuring that it is really, truly accessible to all is important. So we have a lot of, if you like, regional activity. We also have a lot of roots in the disciplines. RDA does not work with any specific or a subset of disciplinary or domain areas. And the importance, in fact, another, if you like, value of RDA is this cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary aspect, a place where disciplinary experiences can be shared and built upon. So the interoperability aspect of WorldFAIR is really quite important for the community that RDA serves. And then we move on to Open Research Commons. So where do we see the connections? There are many across the community and the work that the Research Data Alliance does. We're running 102 active groups at the moment. So you can imagine there'll be many connections across the groups, but I wanted to highlight the Open Research Commons activity. We have two groups, if you like, very connected to each other. An interest group on Global Open Research Commons, which is developing a roadmap for global alignment that will help set the priorities for commons development and integration. And a working group, which is working, if you like, as part of as a branch of the interest group, that is collecting and curating a set of attributes so that these developers and those involved in the commons can compare features across the science clouds and commons. And when you look at the, if you like, the essential elements of a commons as defined by the interest group, and you are most welcome to visit. That document is now available online with the different activities, which is an output of the interest group. But you see that the interoperability and standards are very important and at the heart and at the core. So anything that the activity that is being done by the 11 different use cases in WorldFAIR are really quite important. The lessons that will be learned there as well from each of the different communities, but as well as the, if you like, the overarching work that Simon referred to there towards the end of his presentation. And of course, we have many roots in FAIR. RDA has, I don't know how many at the moment. When we were set up, FAIR, of course, wasn't a thing. And now most of our groups have FAIR somewhere in their title. So, but we have about 6 to 8 groups around the data, FAIR data, but we also have almost equivalent number that are looking at FAIR software, and double the amount, all close to 20 of different like FAIR related outputs. So of course, the I and the R, the interoperability and the reusability are really important for the community as well. And as Simon said, you know, we need to sort of go further than just the F and A, where there is really a lot of work being done. And so, I mean, RDA and WorldFAIR, it was, as I said, a natural and a very welcome collaboration with CoData, who agreed to take on the lion's share of the work, which is the coordination of a project, but for the benefit of our communities. And those 3 bullet points underneath were actually part of the original call text, which just fit so well to both of our organizations. So the mandate was to strengthen international cooperation and around the fairness of data and digital objects, but also to connect these disconnected initiatives around different aspects of the data life cycle and across borders and disciplines to enable open science. And the last one being increased FAIR data sharing. So it is a natural fit for us, and we hope that these, as I said, the outputs of the project and the activities can be really shared beyond just the boundaries of the project as they become available to all. It should be noted that, and it will be clearer when Adi, my colleague from the European Office, the director of the European Office, who are actually running the project for RDA, that it is, you know, the investment is coming from the European Office, but of course it's of value to the whole community, the community as a whole. And without speaking out of turn, I suppose another example of the collaboration that we have together with CoData is International Data Week, and we will see, I'm sure, plenty of WorldFAIR activities or in presentations and insights at that event too. But it is also very much covering some of those bullet points that I showed you before, and we will be having that event in October this year. So with that, I think I will finish my presentation and let it pass on to, I think it's Javier is the next from the European Commission. Thank you very much.
Muted, Javier.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yeah, I am Javier Lopez, working at the Open Science Unit in the European Commission. And well, I would like to explain very briefly some elements of the international approach to open science from the European Commission, and in particular for the development of the European Open Science Cloud. I hope that this will help to give a little bit of context for the activities of the WorldFAIR project. First of all, well, I know this will sound familiar to those of you based in the EU or in associated countries, but I wanted to start with a general presentation explaining some things about our commitment to open science. So open science is a clear policy priority for the European Union, and we believe that it should become the default or the norm modus operandi for research. So what is our agenda for pushing open science to become the new norm? Well, it is very broad, and here you can see many points, but essentially we focus in two different directions. One is to improve the practice of open science in research and innovation, stimulate things like providing open access to publications and data, to foster the practice of research data management, to encourage also to facilitate the reproducibility of research results, and also to make citizens engage in the practice of research through citizen science. Of course, at the same time, if you want really to support open science, you have to develop the proper enablers. And these are of many different nature, because actually you need that the practice of open science becomes from the end user perspective. So it has to be easy, and it has to be possible, and it has to be useful for researchers to engage in these practices. But at the same time, they need to be rewarded when they do so, when they do actively participate in the open sharing of what they are developing, whether it is publications, methods, or any other things. Of course, all this has to happen in a very clear legislative and political framework. So this is a little bit the higher end of our policies of more political nature. And of course, you also need the right tools to do so, the right infrastructures. And it is in that context that the development of the European Open Science Cloud, it is a very strong bet on our side to become a really game changer, and that really will make the open science practice a lot easier and possible across Europe. If you go to the left column, you see that I want to highlight that throughout our policies, the FAIR principles are a very important stepping stone. So we think that open science should really be developed and implemented with the FAIR principles as a guiding principle. Okay, so now if you go in particular to the development of the European Open Science Cloud, of course, it is an international initiative that is clear, begin with, because the European Union is in itself an international initiative composed of different nations. So for implementing at the European level, it requires already a lot of effort on coordination. And actually, we have many different policy instruments to try to seek for alignment of practices and policies at the European level in between the different approaches followed by different member states, and so with the ultimate goal is to manage to federate all the existing data infrastructures in Europe. So EOSC is conceived as a federation of infrastructures where the different nodes in this federation are, or would be when it is finally deployed, data producers and data users. This could be research infrastructures, laboratories, libraries, many other possible kind of organizations, and also service providers for interacting, analyzing, and profiting from this data. Again, it is also very important to establish a monitoring mechanism to see the evolution and the success of the different practices and implementation. So this is all to say that already at the EU level, this requires a very strong effort for coordination, for alignment, for standards, for policies, for legislative framework as well. That is probably the toughest, one of the toughest part of it. But of course, we are not working in, we don't want to work or to grow in isolation. This is an initiative that has the EOSC, that it has its origin in the EU. It is, but that it is global in scope. And actually, we see EOSC as part of the global push for open science. This is for many reasons. I mean, the main one is the fact that we all know, or everyone should be aware, that science is actually a global endeavor, and you cannot try to modify it locally, because that would, well, locally or regionally, that would lead to contradictions. It could eventually jeopardize collaboration. It would affect mobility of researchers and of ideas, etc. So we really think that whatever we do in Europe has to be compatible, aligned, and to a large extent agreed within the possible, within what's possible with the research community at the global level. In that sense, we are engaged. So this cooperation with the global stakeholders, it takes place at different levels. On one hand, there is a more political part of it, where we go to more political fora, like it could be the G7, that has a dedicated space for discussing on open science. The same goes for UNESCO, which is a truly global organization where we try to contribute and align as much as possible. But then there is also an implementation side. So in that sense, for us, cooperating and supporting organizations like the Research Data Alliance or CODATA, which are actually community-driven, where you find practitioners of science or librarians and people actually doing the work on the ground from all over the world, it is very important to us. We think it is part of our strategy to support and to participate to the extent that corresponds to a body like the European Commission in these kind of organizations. Now, as Simon was saying at the beginning, the fact that there is a EU-funded project, but that has beneficiaries, and beneficiaries means, just a quick translation, that they actually received funds from the European Commission, is rather exceptional. It is possible in general, but it is rather exceptional. You can imagine that most of the EU funds go to fund EU or associated countries' beneficiaries. And that, I think, believes reflect the importance that we give to actually enable and to sustain this international cooperation. If you go and read, well, I'm not suggesting that you do so because it's a very long document, but if you take in our work program as a guidance, and in particular the topic under which the project WorldFAIR got funded, there we already explained what are the expectations for this kind of cooperation. And you can read them here. This is a directly copy-paste from our work program. So this core topic was there to strengthen international cooperation and to increase the mainstream of fairness of data and digital objects. This is very important to help to connect disconnected initiatives on data management. I think that there is also, it is important, the international cooperation, to avoid too much fragmentation that may result in this pair solution that could create contradictions. And this should happen across borders and disciplines. And this is a very, very important factor. And of course, we also have the expectation that the project would collaborate to increase the fair data sharing practices, which we have to say, according to all the studies and all the data, we recently ran a very detailed survey on this, showing that the engagement by researchers on fair data practice, on research, well, or let me put it in a better way, data research management along the FAIR principles remains very, very limited today. There is a clear issue of uptake of this kind of practices by the research community at large. Okay, and let me see, here I am. What do we expect to get? Of course, we would like that the projects like a project like WorldFAIR would help to feed the knowledge and the proposals by the global research community at large into the solutions that we need to build the European Open Science Cloud. I think that is very clear. In the short term, we actually expect that the progress of this process of deployment of the EOSC Federation will speed up. There are a couple of, well, we expect that the central node of this federation will be actually running very soon. And we obviously need to get a good definition of interoperability standards for all this to work, for the glue, for the federation to make sense. In that sense, we need, of course, to agree. Well, when I say me, I see the community involved needs to agree on interoperability standards, which regard metadata, vocabularies, persistent identifiers, and many other things. And we really hope that the WorldFAIR project can contribute to that by bringing the views and the ideas and the solutions developed and agreed at the global scale. But of course, we also, in the longer term, we really hope that this is a bi-directional process and that the EOSC will become a part of a global, truly interconnected global open science commons, so a part of a bigger picture. So we really hope that we are contributing the two ways to get inspiration and validation to some extent of the solutions we currently need for this initiative, but we also aspire to become part of a bigger thing that is of global nature. Okay, and these are essentially the ideas that I wanted to present. And of course, we know that the WorldFAIR project is very much active and engaged in trying to actually develop and deliver on all these things. And we are very confident that they will do so. Thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, I will stop sharing when I find the button here.
Great. Thanks. I think I will be the next one to present the final presentation before the questions. So I am Ariasmi. I'm the director of the Hilary calls the RDA European office, which it is, but it's also an association in the Europe. And I'll talk more about the European kind of connectivity, which happens partly to the RDA Europe Association and partly to other initiatives, and how WorldFAIR fits in practical level in these different initiatives. So just briefly about the organization which I represent, which is the association. It was founded in Belgium as a non-profit organization to support the European level activities of Research Data Alliance. We have a number of European projects currently, and that's our main income source at the moment. And we have a limited number of staff at the moment, and we have no physical office, and we work fully virtually at the moment. So just to give you some idea what the European RDA does, and also how it kind of connects to the landscape. So you can see here in the bottom we have national nodes in most of the European countries, or national networks. And we work in this kind of regional level between the national networks and the global RDA, which was presented by Hilary. And so some of the activities, what we do is kind of joining these national activities together and trying to share experiences and knowledge between these networks and what's happening in different countries. But I think that the more kind of relevant for this discussion here in the WorldFAIR is the connection, what we bring from the national level activities to regional level and all the way to global level. And the other way around as well. So we are also bringing things, what is happening in the global level to the regional level and then to the national level discussions as well. And then there's the other aspect, which is also quite relevant here for WorldFAIR, is that we are also discussing between, let's say, although RDA, as Hilary mentioned, is not discipline specific. There is no specific discipline what RDA covers. We try to cover all kind of disciplines. And in that sense, we are a little bit similar than the big initiatives. Also, some of them were already mentioned on the right-hand side, which are usually this kind of e-infrastructure or based organizations which don't have a specific kind of discipline what they're working in. And then we also have, of course, the aspect of disciplinary activities also on the European level, which just example some of these kind of professional associations and also S3 infrastructures as well. And we as a RDA Europe are trying to work on the same level as these regional organizations and bring this knowledge of, first of all, of the global RDA and the national level things also on the regional level here. So acting as a kind of conduct between all these different partners and also between between the different layers of regionality and global connection. So recently we have, which is also relevant for WorldFAIR, we have been active in several projects, and we have funded this kind of activities of ambassador program, which first of all try to connect different disciplinary areas, especially those disciplines which don't have a lot of activity yet in RDA or European Open Science Cloud. And we tried to find experts who would bring this knowledge of EOSC and RDA into these disciplines and try to create activities on these aspects. We also funded several interoperability projects, which are also part of kind of also trying to support the interoperability framework, which was mentioned by Javier of EOSC, and how to get this kind of connectivity with different disciplines and that framework. We also are working now together with several other projects in FAIR Impact Project to create this kind of connectivity between the European data spaces and EOSC, and then the RDA level global interoperability. And there are several other initiatives which are kind of smaller activities regarding, for example, the Coalition of Research Assessment, COARA, and so on. So there's a lot of different kind of activities in what we are doing in the RDA Europe, and how they do connect to the WorldFAIR then is that these WorldFAIR use cases, as mentioned, they are a really key part, especially here on the left side, what I would call the disciplinary space in the Europe. They bring things for the European level initiatives. They also, of course, this is also happening, or disciplinary initiatives. It also brings a lot of information which is relevant for the national networks and national level activities as well. But I do think that the key, or the first level of interest is probably coming from the European level initiatives there. It is also very important that this knowledge, as mentioned by Javier, these use case information and or case study information of interoperability ends up also for the European Open Science Cloud, and also via these other activities which we are already funding and supporting, also for the other European level initiatives, including the ACE-free infrastructures, and also for, hopefully also for the data spaces as well. So that's kind of the background from the European perspective right now, and hopefully that also kind of gives you some framework how, especially if you're working in Europe, how these WorldFAIR use cases or case studies could be used in your work as well. So thank you. That was all what I had. Just a couple of slides.
Thanks, Ari. Thank you all. I do have a few more things to mention before we move on to the Q&A, but given the time, I will be very, very brief. Second. There we go. So I will very quickly mention that I would like to bring to your attention to the published reports that we have within the project. So we have published 7 deliverables, including a policy brief, the project's experience with working with FAIR implementation profiles, as well as deliverables from the geochemistry work package, the social surveys, ocean data, and cultural heritage. And you will see that May is a very busy month for the project. A number of deliverables are currently being prepared, and they will reach you soon. So stay tuned, and everything will be published on our website. So as you can see, a lot of work ahead of us, and you can find everything on the WorldFAIR website and also on Zenodo. So today was our opening session to a webinar series presenting and showcasing the outputs coming out of the project. And we have a number of events coming up. So in June, on the 14th of June, we will hear from the social surveys and the cultural heritage. On the 28th of June, we have what Simon mentioned earlier, the synthesis work package. So we will have presentation on the FAIR implementation profiles and the cross-domain interoperability framework. And also, this is not part of our series, but it's a WorldFAIR presentation as part of the RDA's 10-year celebration. So work package 10 on agricultural biodiversity will present their findings to date. So tune in for that. And September, 2 more webinars from chemistry and nanomaterials and from biodiversity and the agriculture work package on the 13th and 20th of September. In October, we have population health and urban health on the the date is actually being negotiated, so I won't announce anything just now, but stay tuned for that too. And in November, we have 2 deliverables from the case study on disaster risk reduction that will be presented on the 15th. Finally, we will end the year with the second webinar from Cultural Heritage and the Social Surveys work package on the 6th of December. And make sure to check our website for more dates as they are being announced, because the webinars will run up until the end of the project in May 2024. Also follow us on our social media. You can see there at the bottom of the screen. We are on Twitter, we are on LinkedIn, and we also have a monthly newsletter. So you can subscribe there on our website and receive our news and updates every month in your inbox. So thank you. And this is now time for our Q&A. So let's have a look at the chat. No questions as far as I can see. And as Simon said in the chat, we have a few people here representing our case studies, so please do ask questions. Right, Najla question. I have a question to the case study colleagues. Will you cover any aspect of citizen science involvement in your studies? Is this something you are dealing with in your research? Is there a need for data policies for this source of data collection? Thanks, Najla. Would anyone from our panel like to address this? Simon, I see you've turned it.
So there is, to a degree. I really ought to hand that over to Deborah. So one of the partners in the agricultural biodiversity work package is Hivetrex, which is a US not-for-profit that has developed a mobile app for beekeepers to track bees. So it's kind of, it's perhaps not citizen science in the common sense, but it's very much engaged towards a particular sector of the community. But perhaps, Deborah, would you like to say something about Hivetrex and their involvement in your work package?
Sure, Simon, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the webinar, and Najla for the question. And I think I can also address Falco's question here. So indeed, in the agricultural biodiversity work package and case study, we are touching the surface of the citizen science involvement. I believe it's a huge challenge, and there are many also aspects on how do we call that in English, the protection law on the people's data. So yes, Hivetrex is a partner at our work package, and many of the data that they deal with, and it's related to data-driven decision making, is sensitive and not totally open. And also there are lots of data in the iNaturalist platform and others, which also covers species interaction and pollination, which is our focus as well. So we are talking about interoperability and how to really make there in iNaturalist in particular, the user need to go into the web version of the application and really click there that he saw for example a visitation, a flower visitation by a bee, for example. So it's not very easy, but that would enhance a lot the data on citizen science about that. So the short answer is yes, we are touching on this, but it's really complex, and we hope we will contribute to the discussion in the next deliverables and also with the sensitive data. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Would anyone else like to address either of the two questions?
Yeah, Alex,
I've
if I can just,
no.
sorry, Simon, if I can
No,
just
no, go.
follow up on what
Mhm.
Deborah was saying there. I think another issue, Deborah mentioned interoperability. I think reproducibility is another issue with citizen science data, particularly of the kind that's being collected by programs like the Great British Bee Count and so on, where people are encouraged to go out and count the number of bees that they see of different groups. One of the issues that we've got is that it's very, very difficult to identify most of these insects just from observations on the wing. So quite often for many of these groups, specialists have problems identifying them in the field, and they need to collect samples and bring them back into the lab to be identified. So quite often what we find is that the citizen science data is useful for answering one kind of question, but not necessarily reusable for answering more detailed kinds of questions. And so that can be it's not an issue of accessibility or findability, but it is an issue around reusability and how the data can be used in the future. And I think that needs to be made very, very clear within the metadata, and that is something which GBIF, for example, is dealing with. I'm aware of that.
Thanks, Jeff. Simon, you were about to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to answer Dario's questions. So yes, so some of the case studies do deal with personal identifiable data as well. So the social surveys, to some extent, not a great deal. Certainly the population health case study has to deal with that a great deal, because they're combining population health data with clinical outcome data. And to some extent, the urban health case study as well. The case study in population health is having to deal with that on a detailed level. And some of the work that they're doing and the work that's going on in the DDI community is relevant here. We reference some of that and some of those considerations in the policy brief that I've put the link to, and really use that as an argument and an example of one of the key drivers for increased investment in metadata, increased fine-grained metadata, so that we can make more intelligent and active decisions about what data can be shared in response to a specific query. So rather than having this brute, no, this data set contains some sensitive variables, we can't share any of it, enabling data services to provide parts of a data set which may be relevant while protecting certain sensitive variables. So I think there is demand for that in the social science and the health community, for that increased control. And I think that's one of the drivers for the sort of work that we're doing in WorldFAIR, with more fine-grained metadata descriptions down to the variable level.
Thanks, Simon. Jeff has just wrote in the chat, just to be clear, I think I said reproducibility in my answer, and of course I meant reusability.
I think reproducibility is one of the important drivers as well, Jeff. I mean, I think from a research perspective, from a science perspective, this is something that to have genuine reproducibility, considering the sort of processes that data goes through when it's analyzed, we need to have that metadata on process and on provenance and process. And I think that's a really important issue that we're trying to address in WorldFAIR as well, with the cross-domain interoperability framework, which has important work on provenance and process, and reflects that the work that's going on in the DDI community about that and elsewhere.
Don't see any more questions in the chat. And we are right on time. 1 minute to go. So in this 1 minute, would anyone like to raise anything? No? Okay, so should we wrap up? Is this us?
Thanks. I'd just like to ask people to check the webinar series that was announced. All that information about the case studies will be communicated in that webinar series. And as Alex has mentioned, and Laura put the link in the chat as well, a whole host of outputs are coming from the WorldFAIR project in the next few days. So keep your eyes out for them.
Excellent. Thank you all. As we mentioned, the recording will be posted on the WorldFAIR website, and we will share with you as much as we can. So thank you everyone for joining us from all sides of the world. And thank you again to our speakers today. Thanks, Simon, Hilary, Javier, and Ari.
Cheers. Thanks, Alex,
Thank
for
you.
putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Well, goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye.